Peace be upon you, and welcome to a new episode. Imagine what could happen if you were in a big wedding hall, the bride and groom smiling at each other, and suddenly a terrifying sound shakes everything. The ceiling collapses, and bodies are scattered everywhere. Or if you were in the quiet lobby of a hotel, waiting for someone dear to you to arrive, and suddenly an explosion turns that place into ruins, and the daughter of a well-known man is blown to pieces right in front of her father's eyes. And in another hotel, an ordinary meeting ends with bodies at the door, and innocent people discovering that their lives ended in moments. These victims never knew that this day would be the end for many of them, and their encounter with death came suddenly, without warning, in places that were supposed to be safe. What I'm going to tell you today is the true story of November 9th, 2005, the day that was called in Jordan Black Wednesday. And before we start our story, don't forget to like and share the episode so it reaches as many people as possible, and wait for me every Saturday, Monday, and Wednesday with a new episode. And without getting into too many details, let's dive right into the depths of our story. This story doesn't start on November 9th, 2005. That was the day everything exploded, but the planning had been going on for many weeks before that, maybe from late October 2005, or even months earlier. The operation was extremely calculated and organized, as if it were a military campaign, but against innocent civilians. In Iraq, in secret locations far from any eyes, there was a small group of people planning a major terrorist attack against Jordan, and this was part of a larger strategy to spread fear across the region. This group was part of an organization called Al-Qaeda in Iraq, led by a man named Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who was Jordanian by origin but fled the country after being involved in earlier crimes, such as an attempted bombing in Jordan in 2004. He became internationally wanted by both the United States and Jordan, as he was responsible for many attacks in Iraq against American forces and civilians. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi considered Jordan a major target because of its support for the war against terrorism, and he wanted to send a message of terror to the whole world by striking civilian-crowded places full of innocent people, to make the public fearful and weaken the ties between countries. This was part of his plan to expand the organization's influence outside Iraq. The planning was extremely meticulous, starting with carefully selecting the perpetrators to ensure the operation's success. They chose 4 Iraqis, 3 men and 1 woman, all trained for such missions, and completely brainwashed into believing this was jihad, although this contradicts every human and genuine religious principle. This kind of terrorism is innocent of any religion and should be rejected completely. The men were Ali Hussein, Ali al-Shamari, Rawad Jassim Mohammed Abed, and Safa Mohammed Ali, and the woman was Sajida al-Rishawi, who was the wife of Ali Hussein. She was extremely enthusiastic about the idea, based on her later confession, because she believed this was her chance to enter paradise from her twisted perspective. She was going to be the first woman to participate in such an operation in the region, a new step in their strategy to gain more attention and spread fear on a larger scale. This shows how terrifyingly the organization exploited people. The planning was divided into very organized stages, and the first step was to determine the exact targets. They chose 3 major hotels in Amman, which attracted tourists and foreign diplomats because they would be crowded during peak times. They believed these places were filled with American and Israeli spies, but in reality, they were filled with innocent Jordanians, Palestinians, and Iraqis, wedding parties and ordinary meetings. This shows that such terrorism is random and not directed at military targets, and it must be strongly condemned. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi ordered detailed maps of Amman, the roads leading to the hotels, and the security points around them to be studied. This happened in secret training camps in Iraq, where the operatives were trained on every small detail: how to enter without raising suspicion, how to choose the right moment to detonate among crowds to cause maximum destruction, and they conducted full simulations of the operation in those camps to ensure every person knew their role exactly. The explosives were RDX, high-power explosives capable of destroying large areas, packed into suicide belts that could be easily hidden under clothing. They added metal balls to increase injuries and destruction. This was part of their strategy to create more terror and harm as many people as possible. The operatives were trained on how to assemble the belts, activate them manually with a simple fuse, and what to do in case of a technical failure. This included backup scenarios such as temporary escape or switching to a different target if security became suspicious, to ensure the operation continued even if part of it failed. They planned for each attacker to go to a specific hotel, enter among the people, and detonate at almost the same time. This synchronized destruction would overwhelm ambulance and security services across all of Amman, slowing down the emergency response. They calculated everything: the number of expected people in each hotel and how the blast would affect the building structure. For example, Ali Hussein, Ali al-Shamari, and Sajida al-Rishawi were assigned to the Radisson SAS, where they knew a large wedding was taking place, so they could target a bigger number of victims. The plan was for her to detonate her belt in a second location after her husband so that the destruction would be doubled. Rawad Jassim Mohammed Abed was responsible for the Grand Hyatt, and they planned for him to explode at the entrance to prevent people from escaping. Safa Muhammad Ali was assigned to the Days Inn, and they intended for him to enter the busy restaurant. The training included full simulations using detailed maps of Amman, so they would know the routes to enter without being noticed. They also agreed not to use phones or electronic communications after entering Jordan to avoid being tracked by intelligence, showing the level of professionalism within the organization. But in the end, everything they planned was directed at innocent civilians, proving again that terrorism is random, unjustifiable, and must be completely rejected. It also shows how terrifyingly these groups exploit people in inhumane ways. They chose November 9, 2005 specifically because it was an ordinary day right after Eid al-Fitr, but the hotels were still full of events, such as the wedding at the Radisson SAS that had been postponed from Ramadan. This guaranteed large crowds of people with no political ties, and they believed the date would be a complete surprise for Jordan's security forces. All this planning was supported by a larger network in Iraq, including funding from unknown sources and specialized training. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi followed the progress from afar through trusted intermediaries to avoid arrest. They envisioned scenarios of full success, imagining the attack as a signal for further operations in the region. But in the end, it was nothing but a horrifying plan against peace, and it must be condemned. Around November 6, 2005, the group crossed the border from Iraq into Jordan, disguised as regular travelers so they wouldn't raise suspicion at the checkpoints. They reached Amman safely, which was part of the plan that relied on complete secrecy. There, they rented a small hidden apartment to finalize preparations, checking the belts, confirming the precise timing of around 8:50 p.m. on November 9, 2005, and making sure each person understood their role perfectly. They practiced the final steps, such as how to enter the hotels without drawing security's attention, which included wearing ordinary clothes and acting as if they were guests or tourists. The plan required entering the hotels without any additional weapons so they would remain unnoticed, and using manual fuses to detonate the explosives in crowded places like wedding halls or lobbies. They agreed not to communicate with each other after they spread out across Amman, so that if one of them failed, the others would continue. This ensured that the operation would still succeed even if part of it went wrong. They calculated everything, including how the explosions would affect the number of casualties, showing how horrific the planning was, directly targeting innocent people. Now we come to the day of the execution, November 9th, 2005, the Wednesday that was later called Black Wednesday. At around 8:50 p.m., everything was ready according to plan, and this was the time they chose because the hotels would be full of people. The first explosion happened at the Radisson SAS, where a large wedding was being held for Ashraf Daas and Nadia al-Alami, with around 900 guests from Jordan, Palestine, and Iraq. The wedding had been postponed from Ramadan and was scheduled for that day after Eid al-Fitr. Ali and Sajida entered the hall easily, asked about the wedding as if they were guests, and stood among the people who were applauding the bride and groom. At that moment, Ali stepped forward and pressed the switch on his belt. The explosion was massive, instantly killing 38 people, including the bride's father and the groom's father, as well as many relatives and friends. The hall turned into complete destruction, with the ceiling collapsing and debris everywhere. It was the largest of the three explosions. Sajida attempted to detonate her explosives in another corner to double the destruction as planned, but the fuse malfunctioned due to a technical error. She fled with the people who were running away, blending into the crowd so she wouldn't be caught immediately, something that was part of their backup scenarios. A few minutes later, at the Grand Hyatt, Rawad entered the lobby, ordered a juice to appear normal, then went to the bathroom to adjust his belt according to the plan. He came out and detonated the explosives at the entrance and near the bar, killing 9 people, including Rima Akkad, instantly. Her father, Mustafa Akkad, the famous Syrian filmmaker who directed films like The Message and Omar al-Mukhtar, was severely injured. He fought for 2 days in the hospital, but died on November 11th, 2005. His death was a major blow to the cultural world, as Mustafa Akkad was a symbol of spreading Arab culture globally. At nearly the same time at the Days Inn, Safa tried to enter the hotel as planned, but security became suspicious of him because he looked nervous. He ran toward the door and detonated the explosives in the restaurant, killing 3 people, including members of a Chinese delegation who were attending a routine military meeting with Jordanian army personnel. It was the least destructive attack because the suspicion altered the execution slightly, but it was still part of the coordinated operation meant to cause massive chaos. The total outcome was horrifying and unprecedented in Jordan's history. 60 people killed and 115 injured from different nationalities, including Jordanians, 36 killed, Palestinians, 5, Iraqis, 6, Americans, 4, Chinese, 3, Bahrainis, 2, Syrians, 2, a Saudi, 1, and an Indonesian, 1. This shows that this kind of terrorism is random and targets everyone without discrimination. Among the prominent victims, aside from Mustafa Akkad and his daughter Rima Akkad, was Bashir Nafeh, the head of Palestinian military intelligence, who happened to be in the hotel. Many families attending the wedding were killed, including the parents of the bride and groom, turning the celebration into a massive tragedy. There were also children and women among the victims, which adds even more horror to the event. The response was swift and organized, showing Jordan's strength in confronting terrorism. King Abdullah II was on an official visit to Kazakhstan on November 9th, 2005, but he immediately cut the trip short and returned to Jordan, He declared 3 days of national mourning, and he and Queen Rania visited the wounded in hospitals. He said that justice will reach the criminals, sending a message of resilience to the people and confirming that Jordan would respond firmly. The Jordanian people took to the streets in large demonstrations in Amman and other cities, chanting against Abu Musab al-Zarqawi and his tribe, who publicly distanced themselves from him and pledged loyalty to the king. This showed the unity of the people against terrorism. There was also an internal media campaign to condemn terrorism and support the victims. Internationally, the United Nations condemned the attacks as barbaric terrorism, and U.S. President George Bush described them as heinous acts. Arab leaders also strongly condemned the attacks, as did Russia, China, and the European Union. This affirmed that such terrorism is universally rejected and that cooperation is needed to fight it, which helped Jordan receive international support for the investigations. Immediately after the attacks, the authorities imposed a security cordon around the 3 hotels and launched investigations under the supervision of the General Intelligence Department and the police, with specialized counterterrorism teams. This included sealing off the areas and preventing anyone from approaching to preserve the evidence. The first step was collecting physical evidence from the sites. Remnants of explosives confirmed to be RDX with metal balls, which helped identify them as military-grade explosives from Iraq, directing the investigation toward Iraqi networks linked to al-Qaeda in Iraq. The chemical composition of the explosives was also analyzed to confirm their source, including comparisons with samples from previous attacks in Iraq. Security footage from hotel cameras was recovered, showing the attackers entering. The investigators analyzed the videos frame by frame to identify their features and clothing, helping to create profiles that were distributed to security forces. Survivor testimonies were also crucial. People at the wedding described a strange woman fleeing after the explosion, which led to identifying Sajida. Survivors at the Grand Hyatt described Rawad entering the bathroom, and at Days Inn, they described Safaya and the security suspicion he aroused. All these testimonies were collected and analyzed to build a complete picture of the attackers. On November 10, 2005, al-Qaeda in Iraq claimed responsibility in an online statement which directed the investigation toward Iraqi networks associated with Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. This helped expand the investigation to include international cooperation with the United States and Iraq, which provided information about the organization's movements and members. The statement was analyzed to determine its style and source. The investigations focused on Iraqis in Amman, and more than 120 people were arrested within a few days, mostly Iraqi and Jordanian suspects, based on intelligence from inside and outside Jordan, such as tracking financial transactions and travel from Iraq. This included interrogating detainees who provided details about the intermediaries who helped the attackers enter Jordan. In less than 4 days, Sajida was captured in a hideout in Amman after her identity was confirmed through videos and survivor testimonies. She was being tracked based on information from other detainees. She confessed in a televised recording broadcast by the authorities, describing how she entered with her husband, attempted the bombing, but it failed due to a fuse malfunction. She admitted the full planning and gave the names of the other attackers, which was a major turning point, helping confirm identities and uncover the network. The investigations continued for months, including interrogating detainees who provided details about the training in Iraqi camps. This helped prevent potential future attacks and also uncovered a larger network of intermediaries in Jordan who provided housing and transportation. The trials began at the State Security Court in Jordan in 2006 and were partially open to the media to demonstrate judicial transparency. They were part of the justice promised by the King of Jordan. Sajida and 3 other network members were charged with terrorism, killing innocents, and conspiring with a terrorist organization. During the sessions, Sajida spoke in a low, stammering voice, claiming she was determined to carry out the operation because she believed it was jihad, and she described the planning in detail. The defense tried to argue that she was coerced by her husband and the organization, and that she was brainwashed, but the court rejected this because she had traveled freely, crossed borders without surrendering, and had a final chance when her belt failed, but chose to flee instead of surrendering. This proved she participated voluntarily. On September 21, 2006, she was sentenced to death by hanging, but the execution was delayed for years due to legal appeals and humanitarian procedures. The story didn't end there. About 9 years later, Sajida returned to the spotlight due to new events related to terrorism. On December 24, 2014, the Jordanian pilot Muath al-Kasasbeh was captured by ISIS in Syria during an air mission over Raqqa after his plane crashed due to a technical malfunction. ISIS announced that they had taken him prisoner as part of their campaign against the international coalition. They began negotiations with Jordan, demanding the release of Sajida in exchange for Muath, which was an attempt to exploit the event for propaganda and to blackmail Jordan. They were using the pilot to apply pressure. Jordan initially agreed to the exchange but requested video proof that he was alive. The negotiations continued for weeks, and in January 2015, Jordan received information that ISIS had already executed him, but they were stalling to maximize media impact and increase pressure. This was part of their strategy to spread fear. On February 3, 2015, they released a horrifying video showing Muath being burned alive, which caused global outrage and shock in Jordan. It was a heinous crime against humanity. Jordan responded decisively. On February 4, 2015, Sajida was executed by hanging in Swaka prison, alongside another terrorist named Ziad al-Karbuli. Jordan also launched an intense air campaign against ISIS sites in Syria and Iraq, causing heavy losses among their ranks. This was a direct retaliation for Muath's murder. That day changed many lives forever. The bride and groom experienced severe psychological trauma, required years of treatment, and later shared their story in television interviews in Jordan. They spoke about how their wedding turned into a nightmare and how they saw the bodies of their family members together. This reminds us that terrorism destroys entire families and leaves wounds that do not heal easily. Terrorism has no religion or sect, and it must be completely rejected. Justice will prevail no matter how long it takes, and strong nations endure and rebuild themselves. And with that, today's episode is complete. If this is your first time watching the channel, don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell to receive all new content. Wait for me in a new episode. Goodbye.